Taos Ski Valley has evolved into a world-famous destination. It's popular with beginners and experts who enjoy the extreme chutes and high-altitude slopes. But long before TSV was founded by Ernie Blake and his family in 1955, the area drew hundreds of miners seeking their fortune in the hidden valleys of northern New Mexico. Listen as Ernie's oldest son, Mickey, shares some tales of the history of Twining.
The name of the community is Twining, and if someone asks me from the Taos area, where are you from, I answer Twining. That means something locally, even now. This photo is really a neat one. It's a couple miners up across the valley looking down on the mill and the famous lift that went up to the top next to the mine dump, or mine slide as they call it. And this was a very interesting lift. It was a lift such that the empty cars were pulled up the hill by the weighted cars with ore in them. And they had a little problem. They didn't realize the speed at which the loaded cars would go down. And when they went down, the first car jumped off the cable and went right through the wall of the mill and came out the other side. So after that, they put a giant brake up on the top. And that brake is still in place up there, or the last time I walked up there, it sure was, and I don't know why anybody would take that. There was a major 1865 fire that burned the whole valley, so this is young growth at that point, or 30-year-old growth. This picture shows a lot. This is the top of the lift where the ore was loaded. The mine shaft was actually back around the hill, and you can still look in it. I don't recommend going in it. And mules would haul the ore cars along these tracks. It was single beyond here. And they would dump them into the hopper here, and that was the ore that went down to the mill. On these poles, Twining had the first electricity in Taos County. They had what was called a Delco in those days. This was a very expensive mill in operation to build, and phone service was needed to the top there to say stop, go, whatever. That is where they put the brake after the accident. Here we're looking at the mill. It was a mill and smelter. Here we're looking at the famous Twining Hotel. It's right here. The foundation you can still see today. And on down here you see cabins. There were a number of cabins here for the mining staff. In fact, the population was several hundred at the peak of its operation between 1900 and 1903 or so. And this is the mill close up. You can see the mine slide or mine dump behind. It's interesting, this little tower was used by the local surveyors, a backside or something they told me. I didn't understand, but when the mill burned, they lost a major point of reference, and all the surveys up here are just cuckoo, because between this and when the number one marker washed away in the Great Flood of 1904, it left them, each guy made his own survey up here. None of them fit together. Here we have a really nice shot of the mill. And once again, you have my favorite survey point. And this is earlier. It appears that there's not much broken glass and so on. And of course, these aspens came in after the Great Fire here in the valley, which was in the 1860s. And that's why it looks much different today. The mill, as I said, when they lost that, they lost their survey point. In fact, that was in 1942. It burned to the ground, and I don't think it was anything but arson. It was. Somebody burned it. They had a hell of a fire. Here we have the mill again. It was built by Albert C. Twining, and he was way ahead of his time because he fleeced his savings and loan back in New Jersey to fund this. And he was eventually arrested. I hope we have a picture of it on the porch of the Twining Hotel, which he had also built, by a U.S. Marshal. And by God, if his case didn't go all the way to the Supreme Court. This picture was staged in the old Twining Hotel. because this was a mining community, as so many ski areas in the West. And these guys did this photo. I've heard that one of them is a photographer, I don't know which. But what they did with these is they'd send them back east to their girlfriends and wives to show how wild the Wild West was. Well, here we're looking at a picture taken about 1900 of the directors and executives of the mine. As I said, this community began as a mine town, and they mainly mined copper, but they were able to pull a little gold in with it. The problem was that the ore was relatively low grade, and the cost of shipping it to Denver or El Paso, where the smelters were, was too much. That's why they built a mill right here to smelt the ore. Interestingly, the evil guy, Fraser, for whom Fraser Mountain is named, 12,000-foot peak, is sitting back there. And the story gets really interesting because when the mine failed, he managed to end up with all the property afterwards. And they continued mining. And in 1914, he got into an argument with one of his partners, pulled out a pistol from the wagon jerry box and was going to shoot this other partner, Bidwell. But Bidwell had a rifle, and he shot Fraser, and unfortunately the bullet went right through Fraser and struck a 9-year-old that was holding his parents' horses at their wagon. And there's a good story about Tommy Holder. When I was a child, he was our game warden, and he still had the bullet in his back. He went to the clinic and asked, you know, I've had this for 50 years, should I have it taken out? And they said, God, no, you're not going to touch that. And my favorite part of the story of Tommy Holder Jr., who was holding the horses, was that he was our game warden. As children, we called him Uncle Tom, and he got virtually everybody for fishing without a license. He'd cruise around up here and just nail them left and right. And here we have a picture of Twining. The mill was back here, just behind us. These were mill ponds, and there was a great long ditch that went about a mile up the valley to intercept the lake fork of the Rio Hondo to keep these full. Unfortunately, I don't know what they used the water for, but my brother and sister used it for fishing, and you can see two little figures right there. And currently, the Sierra del Sol, these were drained, and they put the Sierra del Sol on top of it, and they discovered that they had all kinds of footing problems because that having been a pond for, at that point, 70 years or so, the ground was always mushy, and they should have done something to support the foundations. My family did mention that it had been a pond, but didn't seem to be taken into the architectural drawings. And here we have something the Ski Valley wishes it still had. These are staff housing cabins, and the miners lived in the bunk houses, and of course the Ski Valley's been terribly short of housing, but unfortunately the Randall family from Randall Lumber in town came up in the 20s and took them all apart, and they built the El Chico Motor Court across from Michael's kitchen out of the lumber they picked up from here. This photo is even earlier because this is Amazet. Amazet was the mine community that preceded Twining. And it was an even larger community than Twining, quite a number of people. I've heard numbers like 800, that seems a little too much. But the mines played out. And so the people left Amazet, and all they had to do was go 2 miles up here, and here you see the mountain in which the Fraser Copper Company drilled or mined. And Amazet, of course, was the first community up here because this area was mined. The modern road follows almost exactly this path right here. And there were buildings on both sides, and it was a pretty sizable town. Again, maybe 800 people, but the mines played out in about 3 years, 4 years. And about 1900, the folks that were mining here moved up here. Here's the mine where the Fraser Copper Company developed the big mine in Twining between 1900 and 1903.